Okay, so we're going to be talking about solving absolute value equations, but before we talk about solving, let's go back and review what we know about them, or maybe you have seen before, okay? Well, we know that 2 bars here represents the absolute value function, okay? So these 2 bars represents the absolute value function. Then if I put a number on the inside, that means what is the absolute value of 4? Okay, well, what does that mean when we're talking about the absolute value? Well, absolute value means how far is that number from 0? In other words, what is the distance of that number from 0? In this case, if I have the absolute value of 4, we're saying what is 4's distance from 0? Okay, and we can also use the negative number. This would say the absolute value of a negative 4, how far away is negative 4 from 0? Okay, well, let's just look at a number line real quick, see if we can kind of understand what's going on here. If I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then negative 1, 2, negative 3, negative 4, let's just focus on the absolute value of 4, okay? So what that says is how far away is 4 from 0? Well, here's 4. How many units away from 0 is 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. So the absolute value or the distance of 4 from 0 is 4. Okay? What about negative 4? Negative 4 is here. How far away is it from 0? 1, 2, 3, 4 units. So the absolute value of a negative 4 is also 4. Okay? So notice in both of these examples, what is our answer? It's the positive of whatever's on the inside. So the absolute value of 4 is 4, and the absolute value of a negative 4 is 4. Well, why is that? Because distance is positive. So we're always going to get a positive value when we take the absolute value of our number, okay? So the absolute value represents the distance away from 0. However, we want to be able to solve. So if I had something like this, in a sense, whoops, going back there, missed that. In a sense, this would be like working backwards from what we just looked at. This says what number or numbers that I can plug in for x would give me a distance of 4. Well, we just showed what? Couldn't x equal 4? Well, yeah, because the absolute value of 4 is 4. Could x equal a negative 4? Yeah, it could also equal a negative 4 because it's also a distance of 4, right? So actually, in some of our examples, we're going to have 2 answers and both of them are correct. The absolute value of 4 is 4 and the absolute value of a negative 4 is 4. Okay? So we could have 2 answers that are both correct. Now, when it actually comes to solving absolute value equations, when we get to the more complicated ones, these are the steps we're going to follow in order to solve. Now, for now, what you need to focus on are these steps. Step number 1, okay, get the absolute value by itself. No matter what we're looking at, we have to check to make sure that the absolute value is by itself. Step number 2, this is for when we are dealing with some special cases here. We have to recognize how many solutions there may be. Now, for right now, we don't have to worry about that step. Right now, let's just focus on step number 1. Then we also have to focus on step number 3, which is set the inside expression equal to the positive and negative number. Remember, just like over here, going back to the example we looked at, there were 2 answers that were correct. Positive 4 and negative 4 are both 4 units away from 0. Their absolute values are both 4. So we could have more than one solution. Okay? So we set the inside expression equal to the positive and negative. Solve the equation if necessary. So if there's an equation, we got to solve it. And then if you need to, check your answer. So really, for today, what we're going to focus on is steps 1, 2, 4, if we can solve an equation, solve it, and then if we need to, we can check, okay? Step number 2 will make more sense when we see other examples that have kind of those special type cases, okay? So now let's look at this example here. Step number 1 is make sure that we get the absolute value by itself. Now, is this This guy right here by itself. And what I mean, is there any addition by 2? Is there any like subtraction by 3 happening? Division here? Is there anything else happening around this guy? No, it's completely by itself on that side of the equation. So step number 1 here, is it by itself? Yes, it's by itself. We're good to go there. Step number 2, again, we're just kind of skipping for now until it makes more sense later. Step number 3, what it says to do is set the inside expression. In this case, the inside expression here between the 2 bars is m. We're going to set that inside expression m equal to this positive number, but we're also going to set it equal to the negative value. So we're going to set it to a positive 8 and a negative 8. Okay? Step number 4, solve the equations. Well, do we have any equations to solve here? No, these are already solved, right? So that step is in place for when we actually have to solve, but in this case, everything's already solved. So this would be my answers. M equals 8 and m equals negative 8, okay? Well, how do we know we're right? Well, if I plug these back in here, we should get 8. If I take the absolute value of 8, is that 8? Yeah, the absolute value of 8 is 8. So those sides match. What about the absolute value of a negative 8? If I plug in a negative 8 into here, is that going to give me 8? Yeah, the absolute value of a negative 8 is also 8. So 8 equals 8. So notice when I check my answers here, these both worked. They both give me a distance away from 0 of 8 units. Okay, so those would be my answers. What about number 3 here? Well, step number 1, we got to get the absolute value by itself. Is this completely by itself on this side? Yes it is. So we're good there. Skip number 2 for now. Step number 3, we set the inside expression equal to a positive 2, and we also set it equal to a negative 2. Now, step number 4, are there any equations here to solve? No, it's already solved. We don't have to solve anything. P is already by itself, so these are my answers. Okay? And then, of course, we can always plug it back in. But is the absolute value of 2, 2? Yeah. Is the absolute value of a negative 2, 2? Yeah. So both of these guys are correct. Okay? Now let's get to some that actually have something else going on. So if I look at this guy here, what does that remind you of? Doesn't that look like a one-step equation? Yeah, it's very similar to a one-step equation, and in fact, that's how we're going to solve this guy. So step number 1, what did we have to do? Get the absolute value by itself. Is it by itself on that side? No, we have to move this to the other side, right? This minus 1. Well, we move it over just like we would a one-step equation. I add 1 to both sides, inverses cancel, and I get the absolute value of x equals 9. Now, is it by itself? Yes. Skip step number 2 for now. Go to step number 3. Set the inside expression equal to the positive 9 and set it equal to a negative 9. Now, are there any equations to solve here? No, x is already by itself, so step number 4 is taken care of. These are our answers. Okay. Now, for this example, I'll plug it back in and check our answer, but from the next examples, just to save us some time, I don't want to have to waste our time on this video. So I'll check it on this one, and then we'll work through the other ones, but we won't check the answers, okay? So plugging these back in, let's just check this. If I plug in 9 back into this absolute value equation, we'd have the absolute value of 9 minus 1 equals 8. Well, let's check to see if that works. What's the absolute value of 9? 9. What's 9 minus 1? 8. Does 8 equal 8? Yeah. So 9 is correct. Well, let's try negative 9. If I plug that back in. So we have the absolute value of a negative 9 minus 1 equals 8. What's the absolute value of a negative 9? 9. What's 9 minus 1? 8. Does 8 equal 8? Yes. So both of those are correct. Okay. Again, just to save us some time, I won't check on the next examples, but just know you can always plug it back in to check. Okay. So let's look at example 5 here. What's step number 1? Get the absolute value by itself. Well, what does this remind you of? Well, it looks like a one-step equation, right? Well, what would we normally do in a one-step equation? We would multiply 8 to both sides to clear the fraction, right? Get rid of that division, but we have to do it to both sides. So that gets rid of my 8 there, and I get the absolute value of n equals, what's 4 times 8? 32, okay? Now, skip number 2 for now. Step number 3, set the inside expression equal to the positive 32 and set it equal to the negative 32. Now, is there anything to solve here? No. So we're good there. These are my answers. Okay? Example number 6 here. First of all, we got to get the absolute value by itself. Is it by itself on this side? Yes, it is by itself on this side. So what are we going to do? Skip number 2 for now. Go to step number 3. Set the inside expression equal to the positive value and the negative value. So we have r minus 1 equal to a positive 6 and r minus 1 equal to a negative 6. Now step number 4 is going to make more sense. So step number 4 said solve the equations, okay, or equation. Now that step really takes a role here, and we're going to add 1, because this is a one-step equation, to solve for r, okay? So we're solving these one-step equations to get r by itself. Well, the inverses cancel, and I get r equals, what's 6 plus 1? 7, okay? And then we'd have to do the same thing here. We have r minus 1 equals a negative 6. Well, how do I move a minus 1 over? Add 1 to both sides, correct? So I get 1 is equal to different sign. What do? I subtract and keep the sign, right? Well, 6 minus 1 is 5. 6 is bigger and it's negative, so this would be negative 5. So these would be my two answers. R equals 7 and R equals negative 5. Okay? Number 7 here, okay? Get the first step, get the absolute value by itself. Is this guy by himself on this side? Yes. So what do we have to do next? Skip number 2 for now. Step number 3, set the inside expression p plus 8 equal to the positive 11 and set it equal to the negative 11. Okay. Step number 4, this is where the solving equations make sense now. We solve both of these one-step equations. Okay. Well, how do I solve these one-step equations? What do I need to move? 8. It's positive, so we need to subtract 8. So I get p, inverse cancels out, is equal to, what's 11 minus 8? 3. Same thing on this side. How do I move the 8 over? Subtract 8 from both sides, and we get p is equal to, what's a negative 11 minus 8? Same sign, what do? Add and keep the sign, so we get 8 plus 11 is 19, and since they're both negative, we get negative 19. So these would be both of my answers. P equals 3 and P equals negative 19. Okay? So this is the most simple examples that we can see for today. And this is what we're going to focus on, is just kind of getting the basics down. Then tomorrow, we're going to look at the examples that are more like two-step and multi-step. Okay? Now, last thing I want to point out here is sometimes we run into what would be considered more like the special cases or different possible answers that might show up. This is what I'm referring to in in step number 2, when it says check how many possible solutions there are. In all these other examples, how many solutions did we have? 2. And that's going to be the majority of the time. You're going to find that there are 2 answers. However, once in a while, we're going to run into other situations. Like in example 8 here, it says the absolute value of x equals a negative 7. Well, first of all, step number 1, is the absolute value by itself on that side? Yes. Step number 2, this is where it comes into place. And here's why, guys. An absolute value, is the absolute value positive or negative? Positive, right? Because it represents distance. Absolute values are always positive. So, can an absolute value ever equal a negative number? No. An absolute value cannot be negative. We don't have negative distance. I'm not -7 away from 0, right? This is not possible. Okay? So if you run into a situation where an absolute value by itself equals a negative number, that is no solution. That's our answer. There is no solution that would make this true. I can't be a -7 distance. Okay? Then number 9 here, again, step number 1, check to see, is the absolute value by itself on this side? Yeah, it is by itself on this side. So step number 2 here, check for possible solutions. That's what I'm trying to get you guys to understand. Well, we've already seen what happens when I have a positive number. When I was set equal to a positive number, how many solutions did I have? 2 solutions, right? When I was set equal to a negative number, how many solutions did I have? No solution. And I should actually backtrack here. When we were set equal, I want you guys to understand that what I mean by this is when the absolute value is by itself and set equal to a positive, we had 2 solutions. When the absolute value is by itself and set equal to a negative number, we had no solution, okay? So make sure you understand what I am implying here is that it's by itself, okay? So now, step number 3, we had to set the inside equal to the positive value and to the negative value, right? Well, here's where the other special or different case you might come across looks like. What's a positive 0? It's still 0, right? What's a negative of a 0? Still 0, right? Because 0 is a neutral number. It's still going to be 0. So what are both of these? Are these exactly the same? Yeah, so if I solve these both, how many answers am I going to have? 1. There's only one answer here because these are both the same equation. So actually in this case, we would just have n minus 8 equals 0. Well, this is a one step. What would you do? Add 8 to both sides and we get n equals 8. There is only one answer. Well, what's different about this compared to the other ones? This absolute value by itself is set equal to 0. So anytime the absolute value is by itself set equal to 0, there's only going to be one solution. So what you guys could do right down here at the bottom is anytime we have an absolute value equal to 0, that's one solution. Okay. Anytime we have an absolute value equal to a positive number, so when we were set equal to a positive number and it was by itself, how many do we have? 2. So when we're set equal to a positive number, we had 2 solutions. And then what happened when the absolute value was by itself and it was set equal to a negative number? How many solutions did we have? No solution. Okay? We can't have that negative distance there. Okay?